Thank you, Nicole, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for getting here so early. I did suggest to the organisers that we start at a more reasonable time for people coming in from the Pacific into cold Canberra, but my suggestion was made far too late, and so here we are. So thank you very much for all coming at such an early time, and thank you too for many people we know who are online interested to hear the discussion about the political future of Bougainville and how the consultations about that issue are proceeding. The original proposal for this being up front at the conference came from Nicole a few weeks ago. And so as a result, we wrote to the President of Bougainville, Ismail Tarama, and the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea, James Marape, inviting them to come and speak personally. There was then a succession of, there was initial interest and a succession of other possibilities, but eventually we were really pleased when the idea came from PNG in particular of having the senior bureaucrats who've been conducting or supporting the ongoing consultation process between PNG and Bougainville. The idea came that they should come, but they're coming very much as delegates of the Prime Minister and the President. So we're really honoured to have them both as delegates and as people playing such a critical role in what is one of the most difficult and sensitive, managing one of the most difficult and sensitive issues facing the region, and one of considerable international geopolitical importance. It's a very difficult issue. Bougainville aspires to be the world's next independent country and aspires seriously. PNG faces a huge difficulty of dealing with that aspiration. It doesn't want to see, naturally, any part of the country departing. And so there's been an ongoing consultation process. It started in May last year. It's constitutionally mandated. It's required to follow the referendum on independence held in November-December 2019. And it's being undertaken with a great deal of seriousness. And apart from the three major consultative meetings that have been held in May, July and December last year, there's a huge amount of background interaction going on between teams of technical advisors and officers on both sides, and between the two gentlemen that you're seeing in front of you. So we're being offered now what is the first opportunity there's been for serious public discussion of these important issues since before the referendum. The first such discussion in Australia, I should say. So we're really honoured to have both of them. I'm not going to talk about their histories and background in any detail because it's in the program that you've received, except to say that both are people of very high standing in Papua New Guinea and in Bougainville, both of them, with long experience in the public sector and also with engagement in the private sector. And they've developed a good relationship. I hear them speaking to one another as they arrived at the airport yesterday, calling one another brother, warmly. So it's a unique opportunity today to hear their understandings of where things are heading. We've decided at this stage, even though as a matter of protocol, that probably the representative from Papua New Guinea should go first, we've decided because to a large extent what's in progress is something initiated by Bougainville, that we'd ask the Bougainville Chief Secretary to speak first, and then for a response to come from the Secretary for the Department of Prime Minister and National Executive Council, Ivan Pomaleu. So without further background, I'll ask Shadrach to start. Can Shadrach, we've got to have you in the camera's eye. We might ask you to come and speak from here. And you've got Shadrach all mic'd up. Shadrach, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge my colleague, Secretary Pomaleu, the Professor Regan, thank you for your invitation, and of course the Dean of the University, my colleagues from the Pacific, and I believe we've got a few academics who are here this morning. Nicole, thank you very much for the opportunity to invite us to come and speak in this conference. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge Tony Regan for all the logistics and the background assistance that you provided to ensure that we are able to attend this conference. Of course, the Australian High Com, Clayton, thank you for your assistance to allow us to be here. As you note, I will be really representing the President of Bougainville. I think it's wise for me to keep with the script. Thank you all. Good morning, Excellencies, distinguished guests and colleagues. I'm here today to represent the people and the government of the autonomous region of Bougainville. Before I proceed, I would like to extend the regret of the President of Bougainville, Honorable Ismail Torama, who could not attend this conference. Nevertheless, my presentation will be a reflection of the Torama administration's Bougainville Independence Readiness Mission and the post-referendum joint consultations between the autonomous Bougainville government and the government of Papua New Guinea. In 2019, a referendum was successfully conducted on Bougainville to decide on the status of a political future in accordance with the PNG Constitution. After having had jointly considered all the possible political options, the two governments agreed to put only two options or two questions for the referendum. The first choice was for an even higher form of autonomy than the current arrangements. And the second choice was for Bougainville to become an independent, sovereign nation. An overwhelming 97.7% of our people voted for political independence from Papua New Guinea. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2019 Bougainville referendum is part of a bigger Bougainville peace process to restore peace on Bougainville after 10 years of bloody civil war, that is from 1998 to 1997, and to satisfy our yearning for self-determination that even predates Papua New Guinea's independence. Bougainville's historical challenge, or the struggle for the right to self-determination, was subjugated by oppression and the marginalization of our rights. In the past 100 years, we have had to endure the hardship from oppressive regimes who sought to take away our resources, our rights, and even our lives. As I have alluded to, our struggle for independence has been a long one, predating PNG's independence and continues to the present. After PNG attained independence in 1975, a political compromise was reached between the people of Bougainville and the government of Papua New Guinea. This took the form of a 1976 agreement and resulted in the creation of a first provincial government in PNG that was later emulated by and introduced to and other provinces in the country. The Bougainville Agreement allowed for a special arrangement of the autonomy and self-government for Bougainville and its people. Insurrection on Bougainville was reignited in 1998 when the landowners of the Pomaleu mine sought to accept more control over the resources and to have a fair share in the benefits from the mine's profits. The mine which bankrolled Papua New Guinea's independence was operated by Rio Tinto under Bougainville Copper Limited. The refusal by the government of Papua New Guinea to listen to the landowners resulted in a 10-year civil war that cost 20,000 lives and billions of kina worth of properties. No province in PNG has ever lost over 20,000 lives at the hands of the state through direct fighting as well as in conditions imposed by military embargoes around the island, resulting in the loss of lives through bad sickness and diseases. As the conflict progressed to involve the rest of Bougainville, it was no longer seen as a war for our rights and resources, but for the people's rights to self-determination after suffering at the hands of the national government and its military forces. The Pomaleu crisis, as it was infamously known, was fought between the PNG security forces and the Bougainville Revolutionary Army in what turned out to be the bloodiest conflict in the Pacific region since World War II. In 2001, the Pomaleu Peace Agreement was signed between the people of Bougainville and the government of Papua New Guinea. It was a joint creation that formally extended hostilities between the two parties. The Pomaleu Peace Agreement was created to end the war and begin the peace process on Bougainville. It is also a living document that gives the way for self-determination for Bougainvilleans. The creation of the autonomous Bougainville government in 2005 is a result of the BPA, that is the Pomaleu Peace Agreement, to administer the autonomous arrangements on Bougainville whilst acting as a transitionary government for Bougainville as we anticipate for independence for Bougainville. The provisions of the peace agreement gave way for a constitutionalized referendum for Bougainville, guaranteed under the organic law on peace building on Bougainville. The agreement has three pillars. One is autonomy, two is referendum, and of course the third one is weapons disposal. The people of Bougainville has fulfilled these pillars. Following the 2019 Bougainville referendum, the autonomous government and the government of Papua New Guinea began the post-referendum joint consultations. The joint consultation with the two government is an important consultation process required under Section 342 of the Constitution of Papua New Guinea and the 2001 Bougainville Peace Agreement. The essence of Section 342 of the PNG Constitution cannot be ignored. It expressly requires the two governments to jointly consult and implement the 2019 referendum results, that is, of course, political independence for Bougainville. The essence of Section 342 of the PNG Constitution cannot be ignored. It expressly requires the two governments to jointly consult and implement the 2019 referendum results. Since January 11, 2001, there have been three post-referendum joint consultations between the two governments. Consultations were held in Kokopo, East New Britain Province. We have one in Wabek, that's Senga Province, and of course the third one was at the national capital in Port Moresby. These consultations were jointly chaired by the President and the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea. While a number of outcomes have been reached, other issues are yet to be worked out. A major achievement has been a timeline for independence agreed to initially under the WAPEC joint statement and the referendum results implemented in the roadmap. The timeline specifies that the solution to Bougainville's political future must not happen before 2025 and not after 2027. These agreements have been further documented by the signing of the Era Covenant by our two leaders. However, the process in the ratification of the referendum results in the National Parliament is intended to be covered under the constitutional regulations, which are yet to be worked out by the two governments' technical teams. The Bougainville Peace Agreement of 2001 became a critical second opportunity to ensure that the people's rights to choose for their future political status be constitutionally guaranteed, as well as for the results of the vote to be acted on as required and mandated by Section 342 of the National Constitution through ultimate endorsement or ratification by the National Parliament of the peoples, of the choice of the people. Ratification under the spirit of the Bougainville Peace Agreement is an endorsement according to its ordinary meaning. It was not used in the Bougainville Peace Agreement in its technical meaning under the PNG Constitution and or international law. The referendum result is independent of the two governments. The referendum result is independent and the two governments are under constitutional duty to conclude the process in accordance with Section 342 of the PNG Constitution and under international laws and principles. We have maintained our position during the joint consultations that the two governments are obliged by international law and principles, particularly the right to protect the Bougainville people's choice for independence. Furthermore, it is Bougainville's position that the PNG Constitution is supreme and not the Parliament. The National Parliament is therefore constitutionally obliged to accept the proposed pathway agreed to by the two governments under the Era Covenant through the proposed constitutional regulations that are yet to be agreed to by the two sides. To reiterate on the point once again, ratification under its ordinary meaning was never intended to serve or be a veto power to overturn the outcome of the referendum, but as an opportunity for the Parliament to decide on the choice made by the people on their political status, even if it were to end up in a negative vote against independence. In the event of such a result, the parties are obliged to seek mediation through the appointed international moderator. Given that Bougainville's right to choose its political status has been constitutionally guaranteed, it has legally ushered in a new constitutional order in a country where it is not just necessary for the National Parliament to protect the choice of the people, but be obliged morally to seek externally or to seek external self-determination as a remedy for the oppression of the state had inflicted on the people over the years. It is important for the PNG government to recognize that Part 14 of the PNG Constitution is sui generis, meaning it is only applicable to Bougainville in accordance with the Bougainville Peace Agreement to suit its peculiar political status. Therefore, there should not be any fear or anxiety whatsoever on the part of the PNG government to implement the referendum results. In the same way, also it is necessary for the state to maintain the unity of PNG by ensuring that the decision of the National Parliament is not repeated after Bougainville's independence. Any nationwide consultation that has been proposed by the national government with a view to raise political awareness concerning the referendum result or political independence is categorically within the prerogative of the PNG government. The Toronto government will not oppose it as long as it is consistent with Part 14 of the PNG Constitution and the Bougainville Peace Agreement of 2001. The important thing is that the Bougainville people were granted the legal right to choose their political status, nationality, and the 97.7 results has conclusively settled that issue. Bougainville's position regarding the role of the national government is as provided by the Bougainville Peace Agreement, namely to protect the vote of the people by endorsing the result of the referendum. A failure to protect the constitutional and democratic choice of the people will amount to a breakdown of the state's legitimacy and is a ground for Bougainville to accept its right under international law to the demure successor. In that scenario, it will also allow the autonomous Bougainville government to take appropriate action or actions should the National Parliament fail to ratify or endorse the choice of the people for independence. Bougainville, whose system of government follows a presidential system of government in terms of the election of its premier under both its first and second constitutions, is different to the Westminster system by the national government of Papua New Guinea. Bougainville has tried to steer away or resist the watering down of the direct mandate of the people to the domination of political parties, unnecessarily as a viable system for its form of government in the future. Looking to the future of our president, Honorable Ismail Toroma, has made it known in no uncertain terms that Bougainville will become independent. President Toroma has made it clear that Bougainville's future will not be compromised with a lesser political arrangement outside of the constitutionally sanctioned process under Part 14 of the PNG Constitution. However, his government remains committed to the existing legal and constitutional framework that governs the Bougainville peace process and insists that the national governments also commits to ensuring the joint implementation of this process. Achieving political independence for Bougainville requires development of Bougainville to be holistic. This means developing the socio-economic and political capacities of Bougainville to ensure service delivery to the people is far-reaching and that the people are actively involved in the development process in Bougainville. The Toroma administration has introduced a 6-point strategy that looks at reforming and improving Bougainville through innovative means by raising revenue, improving law and order, improving the public service machinery, and promoting good governance at all levels of the government. These are part and parcel of our independence-ready mission and will set a foundation for an independent Bougainville in the future. Complementary to our political drive for independence is our focus on developing the economic sector of Bougainville. We are without doubt one of the richest resource-rich islands in the Pacific. We are the economic guarantor for PNG's independence in 1975. So it is time we look at providing for ourselves. The Toroma administration has initiated several economic development programs through foreign direct investment and the development of industries in Bougainville. These programs will earn revenue for Bougainville whilst creating an independent financial structure for fiscally self-reliant Bougainville. This would require ABG's undertaking rigorous policy and legislative frameworks in both the economic and social sectors that will set the foundation for development, growth, and prosperity for a new Bougainville nation. On that note, we are currently focusing on low-hanging fruits, economic investments, while at the same time identifying high economic impact investments and programs that would help raise internal revenue generation opportunities. Furthermore, we are also deliberately investing in essential infrastructures such as power, telecommunication, water and sewage, and transportation that will provide a conducive environment for business and commerce to thrive. We cannot deny the difficult history that Bougainville has endured and the present challenges that we face as we continue to remain tethered to Papua New Guinea. Our people have spoken unanimously through the 2019 referendum to become an independent sovereign nation. We have fought and spilled blood to protect our rights and defend our people. In the same token, we have promoted, sustained peace and unity today. So it is time for the national government to fully respect and endorse the wishes and aspirations of the Bougainville people to be politically free, liberated, and independent. In conclusion, it is the call of my President Roma to let his people go. Thank you and God bless everyone.
Thank you very much, Shadrach. Before we go on, I want to just mention two people who are attending, one in person and one online. The online person is a woman called Marie Tyler, who's watching, I believe, from Canada. She spent several years at different points of her life working in Bougainville, particularly in Seaway. And she wrote an enthusiastic message to me about this conference, saying how wonderful it was to see senior people such as Shadrach and Ivan coming here in person after the COVID break, because in Bougainville and in Papua New Guinea, personal relationships and direct engagement are so important. So it was great to get that feedback from Canada on such interest. The second person is a person who actually was involved in framing the compromise on the referendum in Bougainville, Nick Warner. Nick, do you mind standing up? I'm embarrassing you. Nick was the Australian High Commissioner in Port Moresby from 1999 to 2003. And at a stage when the negotiations for the peace agreement looked like collapsing, Nick and his first secretary, Sarah Story, came up with a proposal for a compromise which involved the referendum in the end not being binding and being deferred for a period so that it was more acceptable to Papua New Guinea. But a referendum would still happen on independence, which was an amazing breakthrough. And the negotiations were such a perilous stage that both sides recognised the value of the compromise proposal, and it got accepted. And here we are, in 22 years later, dealing with the outcome, really, of the implementation of that very compromise. So an interesting little historical side note to titillate you for the next presentation from Ivan Pomaleu. Thanks you, Ivan.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Anthony, for introducing Shadrach and I, and thank you for the invitation. I might just start by acknowledging in Tokpisin the welcome by the representative of the country that I stand on. So if I could just be permitted to do that in the language that I learned when my mother gave birth to me. So thank you, Drew, Lo, welcome, Lo, Papa Ground, where Pigini Mary and make him Lo, delegation Lo Mipla, mi Ham Mastro, Pasin Lo Plesa, Mipla Luxavelo, Papa Ground Pastelna, Mipla Trometau. So me talk thank you, Lo, this blah. I said in Tokpisin that I acknowledge the welcome from the representative of the country, and I paid my respects to the elders, both past and present, for the opportunity to stand and speak on the land. Thank you. Again, thank you for the welcome. I was going to acknowledge Nick, but you already did. But Nick, a lot of the conversations that we now have are built on some of the critical work that was done at that time. So I do want to acknowledge you. Again, my apologies for my Prime Minister. He's presently in Washington, I believe, interacting with the US government. So before I speak, also acknowledge my friend, counterpart, Shadrach. Shadrach and I have the difficult task of articulating correctly the views of our two parts to this conversation. It's never a easy task to ensure that what we say is the correct reflection of the things that need to be said. So we do apologize that we're sticking to script. But in another context, we would generally just fire off without having to stick to script. Well, I do want to acknowledge him. We are traversing a very important journey, and for Bougainville, for Papua New Guinea. And what we do, what we say, how we relate and interact, all contributes to this conversation. So we continue to maintain a very important relationship, and on more than one occasions we both agreed that even if things unfold not quite to the expectations of what we generally set out to try and achieve, it's important to be able to continue to pick up the phone and speak to one another. And I think that's crucial. So thank you for your remarks, Shadrach. And I'm pleased to be here. I've never been to ANU, which is a shame, but I'm really pleased to be here and for the opportunity to help articulate correctly our part of the conversation and our perspective. As you know, the Bougainville Peace Agreement has been, in our view, a remarkable achievement. Signed on the 30th of August 2001 in Arawa, it marked the end of a long and sad conflict in which more than 20,000 people are estimated to have died. Bougainvilleans and Papua New Guineans are included in this number. The conflict was a terrible mistake, a mistake on all sides. It should never have occurred. And Papua New Guinea as a nation bears the toll of this tragedy. But from conflict we have moved to consensus, replaced the guns of war with careful and respectful dialogue. And the fact is that Papua New Guineans and Bougainvilleans have a shared history, and there is much more that unites us than divides us. And so before I speak about the Bougainville referendum and the next steps in the joint post-referendum consultation process, I would like to briefly perhaps provide some context to the intergovernment arrangements that apply to Bougainville. As you heard from Shadrach, the Bougainville Peace Agreement has three pillars. The first is, of course, the autonomous government. The second is weapons disposal. And the third is a deferred and non-binding referendum on Bougainville's future political status. Whilst the referendum is topical given the current phase of the peace process, an equally important part of the peace settlement is autonomous government. It is unique in its nature and formed in the PNG context. No other part of PNG is accorded the right to attain the powers and functions that Bougainville can. The legal pathway for autonomous government and all aspects of Bougainville peace process are contained in Part 14 of the National Constitution. And under these arrangements, Bougainville can draw down 59 powers and functions of the national government and establish important institutions such as the courts, an ombudsman, and its own public service. Well, I would like to say that the autonomy arrangements have been complete success. I obviously cannot. The fact is that in the 17 years since the autonomous Bougainville government was formed, just a small fraction of the available powers have actually been drawn down. The establishment of institutions and the transfer of economically enabling powers are the foundation, we believe, which would enable Bougainville to build a future worthy of independence, regardless of which point of view we take in this conversation. Economic empowerment and strengthening are the bedrock of stability that will enable Bougainville to become an independent nation, should that part be the eventual reality. That is why the Prime Minister and the President signed what is known as the Sharp Agreement on the 5th of February 2021. And the purpose of that agreement was to provide, we believe, added impetus to accelerate the transfer of power, particularly making it simpler in terms of the process. It is, in our view, work that is of equal importance, in fact, if not more important, as we continue to consult on the referendum results and what to do going forward, because it provides the practical tools that are needed to sustain Bougainville's long-term future. Let me now turn to the referendum. In mid-2019, Prime Minister James Marape was elected as Prime Minister on the 30th of May. Since his election, the Prime Minister has been actively engaged in the peace process. We believe he's perhaps the most engaged Prime Minister over the course of the last 20 years to have spent quite a bit of time and personal involvement in the conversations with the leadership of Bougainville. He was instrumental in ensuring that the final funding for the referendum was provided, and that he worked with the then President, John Momus, and Referendum Commissioner, Commission Chair Betty Ahern, to ensure that the referendum was free, fair, and conducted to international accepted standards. He has traveled to Bougainville frequently, met President Torona often, and at every stage has kept our nation informed of the important work that is taking place. As you would know, and as you heard from Mr. Himata, the referendum result was 97.7 vote in favor of independence. The result would be hardly surprising. In the lead up to the referendum, the pro-independence side was active. We can't say the same for those who support greater autonomy. But I would hasten to add, for whatever it's worth, that the post-crisis autonomous government would appear to have been the dismal representation of what could have been, in terms of the original intents of forming an autonomous government. While much is made of the referendum results, and indeed our Prime Minister has been more than willing to acknowledge the overwhelming nature of the result, the processes as prescribed in the Bougainville Peace Agreement are to be followed. I would point out that the referendum was never intended to be binding on the state, and any outcome, whether it's 97 or 50 or 30%, was never intended to recalibrate the original intentions of the Bougainville Peace Agreement and the Constitution. Article 2 of the Bougainville Peace Agreement is clear, stating the referendum outcome should be subject to the final decision-making authority of the National Parliament. This is in turn reflected in Part 14 of the National Constitution, where under Section 342, it states that the referendum result will be tabled in the National Parliament and that any decisions will be conveyed to the Bougainville Executive. Read together, it's always been a constant view held by the National Government that any final decision on Bougainville's future must be made by the National Parliament, and that the overwhelming vote for independence is duly acknowledged, but does not change the responsibility of Parliament. There is another important and more philosophical reason that Parliament should retain final decision-making authority as prescribed by the Bougainville Peace Agreement. Papua New Guinea is a parliamentary democracy. Its members comprise and represent every person in our nation, including all the people of Bougainville. Put another way, the views of each member represents the views of those in their electorate. Since the referendum concluded, the two governments have consulted. You had the outcome, a matter which is also prescribed in Section 342 of the National Constitution. To date, 3 consultations have been held. At each consultation, the two governments have explored ways to fulfill the obligations contained in Section 342. We have spoken at length about the aspirations of the Bougainville government. The national government has acknowledged some of the key sentiments that you heard from Mr. Himata, and we've considered a range of options and pathways for the future. And whilst the two governments have not always been able to agree on the exact approach for taking the referendum results further, engagements have always been respectful. And for me, this is a demonstration of the maturity of the relationship that the two governments now have. At this point, I would note alongside our joint consultations, the Bougainville government has been undertaking work on a range of issues related to a future independent Bougainville state along the lines of aspirations contained in the WABEG roadmap. Under the WABEG roadmap, the APG has proposed a range of measures, including convening of a constitutional planning commission to consider what a future nation state might look like, along with actions to assume additional powers and functions not currently available. And while the national government respects the view of the Bougainville government, the Prime Minister and the national government's position is also clear. At no point will the national government agree to any commitments or proposal that seeks to presume the final decision of our parliament. That's important to us. I appreciate that for our Bougainville colleagues, this has at times seemed frustrating. Shadrach knows that. We've spoken at length about some of its own challenges, and we understand that. This is an issue that is deeply personal for the Bougainville people, and you had some of the historical context within which these questions need to be raised and answered. We respect that for the vast majority of our people in Bougainville, independence is the end goal. But we cannot lose sight of what the Bougainville Peace Agreement says. Nor may we seek to ignore or discard our own national constitution, which is the highest law of the land. Despite our challenges, the two governments have determined a way forward. On the 5th of April this year, the Era-Convenor Covenant was signed by the Prime Minister and the President. The basis of the Era-Convenor Covenant is as follows. First, the two governments through the Covenant have recognized that the Bougainville Peace Agreement is a joint creation, that the referendum was constitutionally sanctioned, and that the final decision-making authority with respect to the referendum result rests with the National Parliament. Second, the Covenant documents the outcome of the consultation, a number of things, namely that the referendum results will be tabled during the term of the 11th Parliament, that's 2022 to 2027, that the two governments will jointly formulate a brief to the 11th Parliament on its role to give effect to the decision-making process as outlined in Section 342 of the National Constitution. Thirdly, to assist the 11th Parliament, the head of state acting on advice of both the National Executive Council and the Bougainville Executive Council may make constitutional regulations prescribing all matters that are necessary or convenient to be prescribed for carrying out and giving effect to the agreements contained in the Covenant. And finally, that the constitutional regulation will be protected by the double entrenchments provision contained in Section 345 of the National Constitution, meaning that the regulation cannot be altered or repealed without the consent of both governments, and in the Bougainville case, the Bougainville Parliament. The Covenant contains specific timeframes with respect to the agreed path forward, that reporting to Parliament and the tabling of the referendum results and the outcome of the joint consultation will take place no later than the end of 2023. And that following a vote of the National Parliament, implementation of the agreed political settlement, which may include independence, will commence no earlier than 2025 and no later than 2027. The Prime Minister has committed to do everything possible to ensure that the agreements reached to date are honored. The national government and the Bougainville technical teams are working to finalize the regulations that clearly reflect the commitments contained in the Covenant. This is important as once the regulation has been finalized, it is protected by the double entrenchment provisions of Part 14 of the Constitution, which means it cannot be changed or repealed without consent by both governments. Let me now spend a bit of time just to talk briefly on the national government's broader position. And this is probably where I could make a strong point. It is the national government's position that nothing can usurp the powers and authority of the Constitution. While our Bougainville people have sought to make the case for the granting of independence without a formal vote taking place in the National Parliament, drawing on the example of Papua New Guinea's own autochthonous experience in gaining independence, the legal advice of our most senior lawyers are that this cannot be allowed. To do so would simply be unconstitutional. The foundation of our nation is the Constitution, and it must not be discarded for the sake of convenience or political cause. I appreciate that this doesn't cause some concern for our people in Bougainville. You have heard the arguments put forth by our colleague and friend. The sentiments and the wishes of our people will never be denied by the national government. It has been acknowledged and accepted that upon their own free will they have given us an indication of how they wish for the future to be articulated. But as the Prime Minister always says, when he received the results of the referendum in Arawa and all subsequent conversations, a decision of such magnitude must be sanctioned and endorsed by all the people, and as the Constitution declares, it must be by way of a vote in Parliament. And that is why the Prime Minister, in his inaugural address to the National Parliament on the 9th of August this year, made the following remarks, which made it very clear that he intends to undertake a national awareness campaign in relation to Bougainville's future. And it needs to be said that it's not about holding a second referendum. It's about creating an awareness among our people on the pros and cons of an independent Bougainville, if that's the final outcome of these conversations. It allows our people to be able to appreciate what it means. I believe the Bougainville people have had their opportunity to express their view. The Prime Minister's intention is simply to ensure that our people also express their view. In the case of the national consultation, there is no mechanism to draw a result from those consultations to in any way affect the parliamentary process that we believe should take place at some stage next year. In our ongoing conversations with Mr. Himata and his team, we've opened the opportunity for the national consultation to be comprised of teams that includes Bougainville, so that they have an opportunity to also speak to our people about their views, their concerns, the challenges that they've had, which have resulted in the overwhelming vote for independence. As I said, a process of national consultation does not and will not undermine the commitment that the two governments have, nor will it alter the agreements that have been reached by way of the Era-Connect Covenant. It is the Prime Minister's view that many of our people will question why Bougainville is seeking to be independent, and whilst he would never seek to dismiss the outcome of the referendum or the will of the Bougainville people as expressed in the referendum result, he considers it important that as we move forward with a final political settlement, that our people understand the basis upon which decisions will be made. And I might just add that our people will then be able to understand when the 118 members of parliament deals with the final question, that they will understand the background. It is not in any way an attempt to influence how the 118 MPs vote when the question is put on the floor. Let me conclude by speaking of the pathway ahead. Clearly, the commitments made, given the commitments made, the two governments must continue to work together to ensure that the terms of the Arakwanic Covenant are met and that the constitutional regulations are put in place. We must work quickly to formulate the joint report to Parliament. We must undertake the awareness and finalize a motion for the Parliament to consider within the time frames agreed. But we must also continue to build on the opportunities that the autonomous government provides. We must continue the transfer of power process, ensure that the constitutional grants are honored and lay the foundations for Bougainville's future. We must make sure that the commitments contained in the sharp agreements are implemented. And finally, we must look at how, in practical terms, we can take this work forward. That is why the national government and the Bougainville government are looking at ways to reform our national coordination efforts through the establishment of an independent commission that will guide all future work related to the peace agreement and the implementation of the agreed way forward. Peace in Bougainville has been maintained because of the political dialogue process. While the paths we have taken has not always been easy, we have avoided further conflict. Regardless of what form Bougainville's political future may take, Papua New Guineans and Bougainvilleans will always have a close bond and shared history. And it is that which endure as we continue our efforts to formally conclude the Bougainville peace process. And I thank you very much for listening to me this morning, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to speak. Thank you very much.